My name is Brian Fishman. I am a counterterrorism fellow here with the New America Foundation. I'm filling in for Steve Call. I'll do the best I can. He was unfortunately pulled away by a personal event. So I'm here. I'm proud to introduce to you Major General Gordon Messenger from the British Royal Marines. He has had a distinguished career. I'm not going to run through the whole bio, but a variety of deployments: Kosovo, doing tsunami relief, and several in Afghanistan itself. And he is now the Strategic Communication Officer for the MOD. He also did a sabbatical in Geneva, which I think is relatively rare for U.S. military officers.
Yeah, with Vincent.
And enjoys real ale, says his bio. So we'll have to ask you about that later.
Yeah, no,
but with no further ado, please, General.
Thank you. Yeah, I have to say, in real ale terms, America, only a few years ago didn't have a very good reputation, but but now it's up and coming, as Tom and I proved last night. Well, thanks very much for coming. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I'm delighted to be here. I'll talk for about sort of 5-10 minutes, and then open it up for questions. I mean, as Brian said, my background is very much as a soldier, not as a communicator. And I've got quite a bit of experience in Afghanistan. Many have more, but I'm doing okay in that regard. I was there in 2001 in the early days. I went back for 6 months in 2005, 2006 to act in a preliminary operation. It was known. It was setting the conditions for what was to be the British deployment to Helmand, based out of Kandahar and Lashkar. And then most recently, I commanded the UK Task Force based in Helmand, and my command finished in April last year. So and I've kept my hand in since then. So I'm reasonably up to date with what's happening, but I'm conscious that there are areas that I may be slightly out of date on. The job of the sort of catchily titled Strategic Communication Officer is something that's just been established in the UK. It is explicitly targeted at a UK domestic audience. And the sort of direction that I had on arrival from the Chief of Defence Staff was essentially better inform the British public of what we're doing in Afghanistan and why. It was felt that it was important. Important that there was a military guy who did that, and someone who had soldiering experience there, rather than simply a sort of media background. So I'm not a professional communicator, and that may become painfully apparent in the minutes ahead. The issue of domestic public opinion actually is a big issue in the UK, and we weren't in a very good place at the tail end of summer last year. We had a difficult summer in Helmand, and it was felt that we lost control of the narrative, if you like, a little bit, not helped by some tensions both within cross-departmental in Whitehall, and some issues over the resourcing of the campaign in terms of numbers of troops there. We're in a much better place now. There is much more unanimity across government. The uplift, which is pretty modest when set against the American uplift, but the uplift that we got at the tail end of last year has made a difference. And people are much more comfortable that the narrative, for want of a better word, is pretty consistent and defendable. But we still have an uphill battle, actually, in terms of the domestic public, the domestic population in the UK, which is why I think my job will stay for some time to come. I've been to, as part of the job, I go to Afghanistan. I was there about 3-4 weeks ago. And there was a tangible difference between what I left in April and what I saw when I went back. There was a real sense of momentum. There was a unity of purpose, I think, that perhaps didn't exist to the same depth when I was there commanding. And it was an altogether healthier atmosphere and a more optimistic atmosphere. And that's only over a matter of months. Why has that happened? Well, I would say it's three reasons. And I'll limit my comments to what's happening in the south, because I don't have the same sort of level of experience in the east. But certainly in the south, we've been there 3 years. That's all. That's something that we sometimes forget. And I will not pretend that we didn't have a very steep learning curve when we got there, and I won't pretend that we didn't make errors and have gaps in our knowledge in the early days of going into the south. That's absolutely right. But I think we have had a culture of learning from our experience by getting better by being there longer. And I think that what you see now in terms of the way that operations are conducted, in terms of our understanding of the sort of human and physical environment in which we're operating, is as a product of the lessons and the errors that, frankly, have been made in the past. The second reason, I think, for this sort of renewed energy and direction is the level of resourcing that the campaign now has. And that's got an international dimension, predominantly through the American uplift, but also matched by some rather more modest uplifts in some other of the 43 other contributing nations. And that has been absolutely critical, and similarly critical, and perhaps less well publicised is the uplift in the Afghan security forces that is happening at the same time. And you'll be aware of the commitments that were made in the last few months about almost doubling the size of the ANA, almost doubling the size of the ANP. And I recall writing at the end of my time in command, last time, my post-op report, that the one biggest concern I had was the shortfall, the shortage of Afghan security forces in the south, because without them, you're unable to sort of enact the type of operations that need to happen. And resourcing is important, and ground-holding resourcing is important. Because we've learnt a lot of lessons, as I've said, and one of the lessons is don't go and clear ground of insurgents until you have already identified the forces that you're going to leave behind once you've conducted that clearance operation. And if you can't identify those enduring ground-holding forces, then don't go there in the first place, because frankly you are counterproductive in campaign success terms. And if you ask Afghans what sort of situation they want for themselves in security terms, the first thing they will pick, and we should be under no illusion about this, is the situation where the predominant security influence is legitimate Afghan, supported by international security forces, bringing stability and normality. That's what they'll take above anything else. Their second is a situation which where we haven't been, or we've only been in very small numbers, and we are a limited influence, where they accept that the Taliban and the rather more sort of nefarious and unpleasant aspects of Taliban influence will exist, but there's not bombs being dropped, there's not sort of lead flying around the skies, and they're able to go about their business, albeit under what is quite a shadow. And then the third state, and very much the bottom of the pile in terms of what they would take, are those areas where we've been, but we've been only temporarily, or we've been in inadequate numbers. And there we tend to be the contributing factor to the insecurity. And I think we've done that in the past. I think everyone accepts that that's a mistake that's been made in the past. And it's something which we won't make again, and the resourcing that we have seen allows us not to make that again, both the Afghan and the international resourcing. The third sort of reason, I think, for the renewed energy is quite a personal thing. And I'm a fan of leadership and the cult of the personality, but General McChrystal has made a difference. I think that's unquestionable. He's brought a renewed energy and focus to the campaign, and he has insisted on a couple of very sensible things. Now, that is in no way knocking or underestimating the successes and the impact and contribution of his predecessor. As I say, we are where we are as a result of what has happened. But I think the arrival of General McChrystal and his team happened at a good time and has coalesced the effort. And he's made two important sort of foci. The first is the embedded partnering piece, working in a much more close fashion with the Afghans, down to very low levels, working alongside them, operating from the same bases, going out on the ground with them, planning with them, and that's important, and it's been seen to work. And then in transitional terms, it's an important concept, because rather than just simply operating alongside the Afghans, you're now operating with them so closely that the process of transition, when the time is right, will see the international forces gradually lifting their influence and their impact. And then, it's a sort of crawl, walk, run, rather than this idea we had in the past where we were sort of operating alongside each other, largely as a result of the level of resourcing. And that would require a very different and rather more severe transition process that would be rather less gradual and able to, and conditions based. The second theme that General McChrystal's brought is this people-centric business, and you'll have heard it before, I hope. But this idea that it's not about us versus the Taliban. This isn't a contest between international forces or Afghan forces and the Taliban. This is about securing the allegiance of the population. It's about, over time, the population of Afghanistan recognising that the legitimate Afghan governance should be and is worthy of their loyalty, and that people naturally turn to legitimate Afghan governance rather than any other form of governance which they have done in the past. They are very much, and understandably so, as a population in certain areas on the fence. And it's for us to demonstrate to them that we are there to stay, that the Afghan government is there to stay, and the Afghan government is worthy of that trust and loyalty. That is something that will take months. And if you were to categorise it on the back of the operations that have just recently happened in Kandahar and central Helmand, the easy bit has been done now. The military operations have been successful. Security, although fragile, exists in areas where it has not existed in the past. But that is by no means job done. And the hard bit is winning that allegiance by demonstrating the value of that presence, by demonstrating the non-military activity that comes on the back of it. And I don't think that's something that we should pretend will be won over in weeks. We're talking about months, and pick a number, but I would say you're talking about a year. My last point is on the relationship between security and the other aspects of the campaign, and no one in the military believes that the military is anything other than a supporting, the foundation on which the important bit is built. And in the past, I think we've kind of seen the civilian effort and the military effort as related but distinct. And I don't think that that's how it is, and I don't think it's how it can be. I think we just have to view the effort as one big campaign where the military and civilian are working absolutely hand in glove, and in a sequential fashion, whereby I think all my experience and experience of others is that before you can try and do anything else, you need to be able to provide security. Enough security to allow other things to happen, and that is the start point. That's the foundation on which things are built. The next thing, and very much the most important thing that is happening in Afghanistan at the moment on the back of security, is the provision of local governance at the provincial and the district level, and getting good enough district governors in and funneling your efforts through them, and having the Afghan people channel their needs and requirements through that district level governance is a critical capacity building issue in this campaign. And to support them, there's a community council is co-opted, not elected, but co-opted, which is broadly representative of the communities in that district. And that will vary in size, but they're paid a small stipend, but they actually act as essentially the local government of any district. And it is through them that the people, the population, come for the things that normal populations demand of their government. And only once you've got that in place, or you've got enough of that in place, should we then start investing heavily in terms of what I would call reconstruction and development. Because too often in the past, we've sort of thought we knew what they wanted and provided things without having perhaps consulted widely, perhaps without having the understanding of the area that we needed to have. I think having that sort of governance through which that R&D is channeled is proving a very effective tool. Now, what I'm not saying is that you need perfect security before you have perfect governance, before you start doing anything in terms of investing in the area. But before you start doing that, you need to have enough governance. You need to have a semblance of governance at the local level to start working with. And before you can ask them to go about their business, you need to be able to provide them sufficient security to do it. So you have that sort of sequential aspect. Now, there's no natural split between the civil endeavours and the military endeavours of that. That is all one team, one function, heading the same way. Which is why I think some of the civilian coordination measures that have happened with the arrival of a new United Nations head, the arrival of a new senior civilian representative in NATO, are all for the good. And I think that's, I hope, going to be the story of the next 12 months. I could bang on for ages, but I won't. I'll stop there, and I'll take any questions you might have.
As you ask questions, please make sure that they're short and direct. And Andrew in the back there has a microphone. We'll probably take 2 or 3 questions at a time so that we can move through them. I'll ask the first though, because I've got a mic in my hand, which is, we've had this debate in the States about how long we ought to stay in Afghanistan, and we have this sort of 18-month timeline. Nobody's exactly sure what happens at the end of that 18 months. How does that play? I mean, the criticism of that is that this gives the Taliban a timeline that they can sort of plan for. But I'd like you to reflect on that, but also on how does this sort of timeline affect the opinion of our allies and the public in the UK? Are they thinking about these timelines, and what does that do to their sort of opinion and position on the war generally?
Okay. I personally think we have to accept in this day and age that for very sound political necessity, that campaigns such as these cannot be wishy-washy, open-ended affairs where domestic taxpayers are putting an awful lot of their own money into something which is happening a long way away. So I think it's absolutely appropriate and inevitable that we should feel, as military people and as frankly as people doing the business on the ground of whatever cloth, the sense that this has to move at a slightly uncomfortable pace. The last thing we want is some sort of no pressure like that, and the whole thing would just drift rather unhealthy. I also think it's very important that the Afghans get that sense that there is, the clock is ticking. So I think that's something that we have to accept. The problem, as you say, is that, of course, a timeline can be interpreted by lots of people in different ways. And therefore, it is important that timelines are appropriately conditioned and are conditions-based. And the Obama announcement and the like, there's been an awful lot of language subsequently about the nature of that time, that date, and the fact that it would be conditions-based. And I don't think anyone senses in any community that there's going to be a sort of cut and run at any particular point. I mean, I think there's a sense that the international community and the Americans are committed to see this through. So I think that balance is about right. Now, people will interpret it. The Taliban will interpret it. Other nations will interpret it. But I think, given that tension, I think we're probably in about the right place in terms of that. The idea which I've heard that all that means is that the Taliban melt away and will just sort of lick their wounds, get stronger and then come back in 2 years' time. I only wish they would, is my answer to that, because if they did, they would come back to a very, very different environment to one they left. If we were able to concentrate on what matters in theatre, out with any interference by the Taliban in terms of developing Afghan society, in terms of improving Afghan security forces, and tackling this allegiance of the population piece, then when they chose to come back in 2 years' time, there would be nowhere for them to take root because we would have moved on at pace. So bring it on if that's what they're going to do. But I suspect that they won't.
Okay, questions, Andrew? Why don't we start up here?
As to the Afghan population, who local and provincial mayors, governors lead, what is the priority of the local population? That is, what do they expect their local leaders to save personal lives, to protect homes, to protect source of livelihood like the existing business, or do they put as much or more emphasis on the building of schools or roads?
Yeah, I think that's. I mean, I think it depends on where you are. I mean, there's the old sort of Maslow's hierarchy very much at play, and the first thing that they want and will demand if they don't have it is enough security to go about their lives. That is always the first requirement that you will hear. And a sign of progress is those areas, and there are a number of them even in the most challenging areas in Afghanistan, in the south and the east, where things like employment opportunities, economic development, health and education start coming up. We do conduct polling across Afghanistan, and in the areas where security is sufficient to allow stable and normal lives, you see education, health, economic development, and employment opportunities very much at the top of it, with security down the list. However, in areas where we haven't been there for as long, or there is still an overriding sense of insecurity, then it is security that drives it. I mean, an example would be those the Operation Moshtarak in central Helmand. The sorts of things they want and they come to the local governors for. The biggest one is police, actually. And I know there's an issue over the police, but what they want are credible, capable policemen that they can feel confident in. And in areas where we haven't been, like Marja, you have seen policemen on the streets in uniform, but it is only the uniform that qualifies them as policemen, and they've probably got that from somewhere else. These are not policemen as we would recognise them. They work for other people. What they want is institutional police, legitimate police, trained police, non-corrupt police, and that's a very strong demand in the early days after clearance operations.
Hi, I'm Karen Lassie from the Institute for Gulf Affairs. I have two questions. The first is, how do you personally feel about the government incorporating members of the Taliban into the bureaucracy? And the second is, what is the reaction of foreign governments in the country, such as the US and the UK, to that? Like, is it acceptable or is it non-acceptable?
Okay.
Thank you.
I mean, forgive me, but as a military guy, as the questions get more political, my answers will get vaguer. Let me be absolutely clear about that. But I can certainly give you comment. I think everyone recognises that there will be some form of political process associated with the campaign success. I don't think, though, that necessarily means people who remain Taliban being part of the government. At the moment, the reconciliation and the reintegration emphasis is very much on those that are prepared to renounce their past and sign up to operating as part of a legitimate government. That's a very different thing than a solution which sees the Taliban as an entity within some final solution. Now, I'm not a politician and I'm not an Afghan, so I will never say never to any of this. But I think the view of your second question, the British government to this, the view of the military in broad terms of this is that they absolutely recognise that there needs to be some sort of political dimension to a final solution, and that has to be very sort of Afghan in its nature. Because frankly, if we were to try and take the lead on that as an international community, we would get it wrong. And so I think that's where we sit. I do think on the sort of reconciliation, though, that it shouldn't be seen as separate to the military effort. It's very important that the military efforts and the piece of this campaign, which is about us versus the insurgency, and it's not just Taliban, the insurgencies, is seen to continue. Because without that heavy stick hovering over the head of potential reconcilees, they're much less likely to take the carrot, if you see what I mean. So you need to have that pressure in order for that type of activity to be successful. I mean, it's just a case of synchronising it.
Andrew, over here. Why don't we take two questions?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you for coming. Just from a military perspective...
Can you announce where you're from? I'm sorry.
My name is Faris Gawa. I'm just here representing myself. From a military...
So am I.
Yeah. Just from a military perspective, do you agree with General David Petraeus that lack of progress in the Arab-Israeli peace negotiations, or lack thereof, undermine the efforts in Afghanistan?
Okay, I mean, I'm a little out of lane on that, so I'll be very vague on that. I mean, in terms of anything that exists which acts as a coalescing agent to extremism, I think it is a contributing factor to what we're facing in South Asia. So the answer is categorically yes, but he is much better placed than I to draw specific linkages.
Brett Good from the Institute for the Study of War. Given the influx of U.S. Marines into Helmand, what role do you see for UK forces in Helmand? Where do you see them operating, and how do you see them working with their U.S. counterparts?
Great, yeah. I mean, where we were in the south, even as recently as my time, less than a year ago, there was a natural association between provinces and, let's call them, sponsor nations, whereby Helmand was seen as a British problem, Kandahar was seen as a Canadian problem, Uruzgan was seen as a Dutch problem, etc., etc. Where we are now, and it's happened quite quickly and entirely for the right reasons and entirely healthily, we're in an area where NATO and NATO forces are in all those areas. And if you speak to Nick Carter, who's the two-star general who runs RC South, he'll tell you that he is, and he can back this up with actions, broadly nation blind as to what he does with his forces. And he looks at the challenges that he faces in the south, and he apportions the type of capability that's needed to counter them. An example would be he's very hot on freedom of movement, rightly so. Freedom of movement across the south, down the Highway 1 and Highway 4, and some other routes which but some key routes. He has assigned a highly mobile, highly technical US Army task force to provide that type of capability, because it was the right sort of capability to provide it. So what you see in Helmand is a situation which is getting healthier and healthier, whereby in my time we were too thinly stretched because it was seen as a British issue, and there was a limit to how the British could resource that effort. What we now have are approaching the types, and we will have when the Uplift is complete, because it's still continuing, is approaching the types of the force densities that are required to deliver enduring security in the key areas of population, by which we predominantly mean the Helmand River Valley and the irrigated sort of centre of Helmand. So we are, you asked what the British is, we are part of the NATO effort, as the USMC are part of the NATO effort. And what the commanders on the ground are doing are just realigning the boundaries, that as more and more USMC come in order to ensure that the appropriate force densities are matched against where the population is, that you're seeing some reconfiguration and redrawing of boundaries, entirely sensibly. So the idea that the USMC are coming in and will soon have more forces in Helmand than the British do is something which is entirely welcomed by the British military, who have seen it as needed for some time. In terms of how those two forces are working together, you know, we're used to working alongside Americans. There is an extremely successful cooperative atmosphere there, and both USMC and British feel that they're in the same team, look to Kandahar for their direction in the way that everyone in the south does, and are taking it forward in a very, in a very sort of collegiate way.
Hi, I'm Mary Slauson with the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation. I have a question regarding your comments on the integration of military and civilian units in these operations, especially because you've been getting some pushback on that. The UN refused to operate in Marja. Doctors Without Borders has said that the militarization of aid is compromising their neutrality. And so I'm wondering what your thoughts are on whether those claims are legitimate and how to successfully integrate civilian components of this operation with the military side.
Yeah. I mean, the UN, there are security concerns which I think they're in the process of overcoming. And I think you will always have, and this is an entirely legitimate viewpoint, you'll have NGOs in whose interests they feel it is right that they disassociate from the military, and indeed, in many cases, whose mandate insists that they disassociate from the military. I don't have a problem with that. I don't think anyone does, and I think everyone understands that. I mean, for example, there is there's an NGO hospital, Italian-run hospital, in Lashkar, and they do some excellent work in treating civilians, often that have been caught up in the conflict. Now, we have a very good relationship with them, but it is not an overt relationship, because it's not in their interests to be associated with military, but work very well together. So I think you'll always have that. I don't think that undermines my point, though. This is essentially, as an institution, an international effort. This is one team effort, because you can't draw a distinction between what the military are doing and what the civilian effect that flows in on the back of the military endeavours are. And if you do, you'd be creating a false divide, I think, which would be unhelpful in campaign terms. So, who are the most important people in Helmand? They're not, number 3 machine gunner in Sangin District Centre, or the Apache pilot that flies it. They're the contracted civilian governance advisors who go out hard on the heels of military clearance operations, sit alongside these district governors and community councils, act as the principal interlocutors between the international community and good old traditional, locally based, rudimentary Afghan governance, and quietly and unassumedly, in quite difficult circumstances, mentor these people, support them, advise them. That is something which has to be built into the military fabric, because they simply could not do that without having, being part of the same team as the military. And yet that is the most important thing that's happening in Helmand and across Afghanistan. That's what I mean by it all needing to be joined up. And that links neatly into, someone mentioned schools and things like that. If you are providing for the community what the community needs, that would be something the Community Council might ask for. It would need to have a military dimension to its delivery because of some security concerns that might exist. The military may need to have a role in either securing or even sometimes designing some projects which will then go to Afghan firms and Afghan locals to build. So at every step of the way, you have this sort of fusion between military effect and civilian effect, which, frankly, I just don't see us breaking. And I don't think we should try and break it. And that's not to suggest that there isn't some civilian-only the value, and there are NGOs that don't want to be associated with it. But I just, as the whole campaign takes it forward, I just don't see how you can differentiate between the two.
Andrew, up there. Here, Andrew.
My name is Ibrahim Nasser from the Voice of America Afghanistan Service. I've got two questions. First question is, you mentioned in the beginning that it's important for the domestic audience to know that there's a timeline for withdrawal, and for the Afghans that the clock is ticking. So what impression are you giving to the elements in Pakistani intelligence services who have been supporting Taliban, considering them as their strategic assets? So what impression are you giving them, and will that interference increase with the impression that NATO is leaving Afghanistan, or how will you make sure that Afghanistan doesn't become a ground for proxy war between the neighbors? And second question is, Qaeda just recently said that Pakistan didn't help by arresting these Taliban leaders recently, and it stopped the peace negotiations between the Taliban, some elements in Taliban, and the Afghan government. So what's your take on that?
Okay.
Thanks.
The clock ticking piece and how it's interpreted. I mean, as I say, it'll always be interpreted in a way, and I think we've got that balance about right. No one, as I say before, is talking of cutting and running. NATO aren't talking about it. America's not talking about it. The Brits aren't talking about it. Everyone understands that we are there until the challenge of ungoverned space in Afghanistan and more broadly in Pakistan is no longer a international threat, i.e. could no longer be an incubator. And at that point, you will see the relationship between the international community and the Afghans and the Pakistanis change. Of course you will. But no one is in the business of, and I don't think anyone believes anyone is in the business of leaving when there is a risk of reversal or job not done. And if you characterize sort of simply success in Afghanistan, what do we mean? If you categorize what we're doing in Afghanistan in two different vectors, if you like. The upward vector is developing Afghan capacity, both the security forces and the government and the like. And the downward arrow is reducing the residual Afghan challenge. And where you get to a point where the up arrow exceeds the down arrow, i.e. where Afghans can look after their own residual challenges, then in a very simple way, that's when the relationship between the international community and the Afghans can change. But no one is suggesting there's some sort of toggle switch at which point that'll happen. I think this is something that will gradually happen over time, and it'll look very different in 10 years. In terms of the arrests in Pakistan, I won't talk about the specifics of each individual case, and I would certainly say that the best we are able to coordinate activity between what's happening in Kabul, what's happening in Islamabad, and activity on the ground, the better. But I do think, and again, from a soldier's perspective, viewing the problem in Afghanistan, the more pressure that the Taliban in Pakistan feel under, from whatever source, the better. Because, there are Taliban in Pakistan that are fueling and directing activity in Afghanistan, and if they didn't feel that sort of pressure, they would feel much less restrained in what they do. So, to my mind, pressure on the Taliban in Pakistan is a good thing.
Andrew, why don't you come up here? Let's get these two questions, and then we'll move to the back of the room.
Good morning, sir. My name is Jason Fritz from Noetic Group. My question is, in the U.S. there's a very healthy debate going on right now about using traditional structures of justice, governance, and security and using them in areas of Afghanistan where the Afghan government is unwilling or incapable of doing so. Is that discussion going on in the U.K.? What are the concerns from the U.K.? And do you think that they will be used in various areas?
Yeah, I think the discussion most notably is going on in Afghanistan, and I think that's where it should be going on. We can talk about it all we want in Washington and in London, but frankly, it's what's going on. I think there absolutely is a place, and I think you will always in Afghanistan you will always have to sort of construct a continuum between centralised elected national government down to something which it looks more traditional, perhaps non-elected, but it reflects local, power, influence and power. And I think that's something in true governance form, but it takes in justice and all those other things. I think everyone recognises that you need to try and form that continuum somewhere, and that I think is a real challenge as we try and as we try and do it. Because at the moment, our governance building efforts, our justice building efforts and the like are both bottom up and top down. So there's an awful lot of effort going on in the provinces and locally in terms of developing that. There's also an awful lot of effort going on in Kabul about improving that and connectivity. I don't think we've quite got this is work in progress. I think everyone recognises this, but I think the idea of where those bottom up and top down thing are going to dock to form that continuum, this isn't my area of expertise, so let me just caveat that, but I don't think we're quite there yet.
This is going back to the earlier question about civilian efforts. One of the major efforts that was put forward at the beginning of the war was the introduction of PRTs and the introduction of the human terrain system. And we've been hearing a lot of talk as we're increasing troop numbers about increasing the civilian component. However, there's never been any specific talk about how that civilian component is going to be increased. Is it going to be in new units like the PRTs, or is it going to be embassy staff, or a combination thereof? Particularly on the UK side, there hasn't been a lot of discussion about that. I was wondering if you could sort of give your impressions on that.
Yeah, sure. I think this is true in the American area as well, as well as the British areas and others. I think we're mostly talking about doers on the ground, by which I mean PRT level and below, and I think it's based at the sort of district level and below. I think the PRT. Let me speak from Helmand, which is I accept just one. The model that was there when I was there was a strong PRT co-located with my headquarters, and I essentially sat alongside the civilian head. So coordination boards, targeting boards, intelligence requirements had both a civilian and a military dimension to it, and we very much sat at the head of the table, metaphorically in terms of that. There was also an awful lot of what I would call provincial level capacity building going on with some of the line ministries and the departments of education, women's rights, health, etc. That police headquarters and that sort of thing. That was very much sort of based in the capital. I think what we're seeing now is that when you're out there ground holding out in the districts, that needs to be matched by a commensurate level of activity at a lower level, but by that civilian effort that's in tandem with the military effort. And I think that's where the additional resources need to go, and I think that's where they're planned to go. So we're talking about very much forward delivery along the lines I've discussed in terms of this community councils and subsequent investment. It'll be there are differences, or there have traditionally been differences between what I would describe as an American civilian effect and a British civilian effect. One, and no prizes for guessing which. One being rather more cash rich than the other. But actually, you go to Lashkar. Lashkar is no longer a British PRT. It happens to be British led, but that's not actually that important. It is very much an international PRT, and the Americans and the USMC have been very, very good and clear about that the civilian effort that happens on the back of their operations is channeled through the PRT and channeled through the same provincial governor as what's going on in the British area. And so there's much more sort of coordination and alignment than I thought possible a year ago.
Sir, can I ask you a question? There have been a variety of reports in the British press recently about Iranian support to militants in Afghanistan. These have been met with skepticism in a lot of circles because of past relationships between the former Taliban government in Afghanistan and Iran. Do you find these reports credible, and if so, what should we think about them?
I mean, some of this is sensitive. So I mean, there's no doubt that there is Iranian influence predominantly on the west of of Afghanistan, and it's also true to say that is. That it would be wrong to think that is malevolent in its influence. There's an awful lot of benign and beneficial influence that's going on there. It's something that we closely monitor. Would be the best way to put it.
Okay. Let's go in the back, Andrew.
Thank you, Dorian Perez, University of Manchester. You initiated your talk with the communication deficit that the British and American governments have with their respective general publics. My question is, what are we doing with the various different Afghan nationalities in the ways of communicating to them our mission and our goals there?
Yeah.
Or do we have the same problem as we do here in Britain and the U.S.? Thank you.
Yeah, I think this is something which we're going to see. We're seeing a real push at the moment, and I think again it's a characterization, but in some ways it's the contest of the narrative is almost as important as the contest of the ideology or whatever, and there's no doubt. I think sometimes we overplay the Taliban's ability to coordinate its own information messages, and sometimes we're guilty of providing them the platform and giving them rather more credibility than they deserve in terms of coherence and strength of message. Sometimes we deliver it for them. That's a personal view. But there's no doubt that there is a Taliban narrative that's out there, and it's something that we need to compete. That's something, as you describe, is something which is very important at the moment. The international community in Kabul are putting a great deal of investment in that. There's a new, in the American embassy, there's a new highly credible guy gone in expressly to look at that very thing. So you're absolutely right to highlight it, and it's something where I think you'll see an upsurge of effort.
Why don't we take two back there? We're starting to run a little bit short on time.
Toby Harnden, Daily Telegraph. Two-part question. The first part is, what's your assessment of last summer's Operation Panchai Palang? Did we clear ground that we couldn't hold, that we had to clear again in Mushtarak?
Yep.
Was it an old-style, sort of under-resourced operation, or was it a new-style McChrystal operation?
Yeah.
And the second part is, you talked about the reconfiguring of forces within Helmand. Just like to broaden that out a bit to within RC South. Are there discussions going on at the moment about British forces perhaps leaving Helmand and maybe going to Kandahar in the future, are the British at the point where we could move out of what used to be called Helmandshire and actually not be so attached to that piece of territory?
Yeah.
Let's take one more question, just get through as many as possible.
My name is Colonel Kotov. I'm from the Russian Embassy Military Office. My question is not political, but only military.
Thank goodness for that.
2008, you have lost 68 militaries, and 2019, you have lost 106. Okay. And according to new rules of engagement by General McChrystal, suppose your commanders in the field, they have some concerns about increasing of casualties. And this is the first piece. And the second, what is the forecast of your commanders in the field about the future level of casualties, and how did you personally accept the new rules of engagement? I mean, refusing of aircrafts and heavy weapons.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Shall I go for those two? The Moshtrack Panther's Claw relationship. I mean, Moshtrack didn't clear ground that had already been cleared. Panther's Claw was part of the long-standing requirement to clear central Helmand and to provide a sort of enduring ground-holding forces. And Panther's Claw was limited on the back not of the clearance operation, but on the back of our residual ability to hold ground. So the area of Eastern Babaji, Spin Majid, that sort of area where the operation was designed as part of a long-standing need to clear central Helmand. And was delivered as such. Moshtarak continued that and cleared the last two really important areas in central Helmand, which is the area of Western Babaji and the area to the west of that, and the area of Marja and Treknawa. So it was a difficult it was a difficult clearance operation that there was at some cost, but it was very much I would characterise it very much in continuity terms as part of the same piece. In terms of the UK to Kandahar, I mean, the UK currently is doing a job which is utterly, utterly needed as part of the coalition force in central Helmand. And there is no thought at the moment of doing anything other than delivering what needs to be done as part of the coalition force in a key area in Helmand, alongside the USMC. How that function changes over time is something that is clearly being looked at. But in terms of when our ground holding responsibilities can increasingly be transferred to Afghans, and that there are any number of options, but it would be unwise to view moving and conducting ground holding in Kandahar as one of them. On the ROE, you raised an interesting question about, and I set a couple of questions there. Firstly, in terms of the view of the military to the casualty rates that are being taken, notwithstanding the tragedies that each one of them are, there is in every nation, the British, the American, the USMC, which are taking some hits, had some in the last 24 hours. The Danish that are taking per capita a very heavy toll. The Estonians, the Canadians, and the like. There is a real determination that they won't be deflected by those levels of casualties, and despite the difficulty of going on the ground. I mean, there are some areas in Helmand, in Sangin, which is up in the upper Helmand Valley, where you are you're operating in a minefield. Every day of the week you go out there, you are mentally you are operating in a minefield, and you don't know what you're going to step on next. And that's how it's a very, very difficult. I'm not underplaying the challenges. to the guys on the ground. But the motivation is very much there, and the determination to succeed is very much there, and casualties will not deflect. The ROE issue, and here you're talking about greater levels of greater restrictions on the use of indirect munitions because of the risk of civilian casualties. I think this has got people get this in spades, and there's a term being coined in southern Afghanistan at the moment about courageous restraint, whereby soldiers on the ground are deliberately and knowingly putting themselves into more risk in order to safeguard the lives of civilians in the area. And when being attacked, will not sometimes return fire, certainly will not use all weapons at the disposal in order to minimise the risk of civilian casualties. And that can be quite a difficult thing to sell. I mean, if push comes to shove and it's, it is genuinely life or death, then they have the option to use it, and that still and will always exist. But the cursor of where it is appropriate has shifted, I think sensibly so. And the way I always sold it to my guys were, if you do get it wrong, then you're creating a problem for who comes next. You're creating, you're generating those who have legitimate grievances against the international forces. Therefore, whilst you may be taking some more risk, you're bottling up more risk for what comes next. And I think that's a valid point.
All right, let's take one or two more questions, and then that'll be it.
Hi, my name is Pascal Siegel, and I'm with Glivem Associates. You have mentioned the need to increase the number of policemen throughout Afghanistan. Yet we know from polls and interviews that we conduct over in the country that the police force is not well regarded by the local population. Corruption, inefficiencies, lack of training. Can you quickly ramp up the presence of good policemen whose actions are going to increase the credibility of the Giroa? And if you can't, what comes first? More policemen, but glossing over quality issues, or fewer policemen, but building better legitimacy?
Andrew, right here as well.
Thanks. I'm Ken Yates with Jefferson Waterman International. I spent about 2 years in Afghanistan. A lot of it spent in the Helmand Valley about 30 years ago. And it was a wonderful place. I'm sure you enjoyed a lot of parts of that.
Yeah.
I have a question, though, it's related to the last question on the credibility of the security forces that are being introduced nationally.
Yeah.
Since it's a Pashtun area and the Tajiks kind of specialize in security, aren't you running a risk of real heavy conflict there that is not of your doing?
Okay.
And the second thing is, we haven't heard the word of puppies.
Yeah.
It used to be that Helmand was called the American province when the Soviets were around, and the poppies are being grown in the irrigated areas that the Kajiki Dam produced.
It's grown all over, but yeah.
It's going to be...
It's grown all over Helmand.
Yes, that's right. They're one of the premier producers in the world.
Yeah.
What are your plans to eliminate that as a factor and get back to cotton and vegetables and things? Thanks.
Okay, great. Well, it's nice to meet you. So you were part of the original irrigation project and Jackie Dam project, were you? Oh, right. Okay, great. On policing, I mean, you're absolutely right to highlight as a vulnerability. I think I said before that if you were to sort of go and ask your average Afghan, if that's not a contradiction in terms, what it is, it would be strong police. And the quality versus quantity issue is an issue. General Caldwell, who's running the American general who's running the effort, is trying to do both, but is absolutely conscious that just simply churning out people at the same level of training that has been the case is not going to work. I think an important part of developing the police is improving their status and their view of themselves. And there are some steps going to improve that. The pay very recently has increased considerably and is now equates to an army soldier. That's a really important point. the training is being done is being done more locally than it has in the past. For example, in Helmand, in the last 6 months, they've established a provincial police training centre, which is a 6-week course, which is much better than done in the past. They're drugs tested on the way in, they're drugs tested on the way out. I've seen them in action. I've seen them at pass out. There's a pride and a sense of identity there that is better than I've witnessed in the past. I think people say, I mean, you may be aware that there's the civil order police that are in Helmand at the moment on the back of the Moshtarek thing, and I think and that they are seen as good policemen, and they're often out of area, and they have a real national organisational identity. I think that is a real sign of what might be and can be, and where you have strong police leadership. It is incredible how that affects the quality and the credibility of the force. In Musakala in northern Helmand, there's a Commander Koka who runs the police there, and he's got 250 men under command, and they are as credible, as welcome in Musakala market, as effective as any National Army unit, simply because he's there as a strong leader. So I think if you can get this status, identity, training and leadership piece right, and I'm not suggesting for a second that's easy, then there are signs that it can work and the police can be the sort of force that the people of Afghanistan want. On the ANA, the ethnicity point, the ANA is 41% Pashtun, and Afghanistan is about 42% Pashto. So the actual when you look at the ethnicity breakdown, it's broadly right, with one caveat, and that is that most of the Pashtuns don't come from the south; they come from the east and the north, and there is a real issue over recruiting local Pashtuns in the south. And I had a bunch of Helmand mullahs in London. Rather odd to see all these guys who I knew quite well in the sort of the rather grand circumstances of the Ministry of Defence, but nonetheless, and they accepted that they had a problem. They accepted that they had a role to try and improve the recruiting ethos, if you like, within southern Pashtuns. So I think that is an issue. There's an issue over Dari and Pashtun as well, in that most of the ANA speak Dari. I would say though that the ANA are a welcome, credible interface with the population, and what you see in Moshtarek operating with the ANA, very much the Afghan National Army at the forefront, with the international forces back, and it's bringing real reward in terms of things like IED indications, hand-ins, intelligence leads, and the like. So I accept there is something that needs to be done there, but I wouldn't want you to think that they're an unhelpful or an unwelcome influence in society. Poppy, you're right. If Helmand was a country, it would be the biggest producer of heroin in the world. It's not all bleak, and I think there are a number of measures in place which are reducing the challenge. Last year saw a 30% reduction. This is UN figures on the poppy cultivation of the year before. This year, it's too early to say, but it's plateaued and hasn't gone back up again, which many feared it had. What drove that? Firstly, there was an eradication program, and eradication, although it is not universal in Helmand, adds to that risk-benefit decision that a farmer will take in September, October each year as he decides how much of his fields to plant. And a number of them, probably because of the eradication, I think, chose not to grow poppy. We are interdicting not farmers, but we're interdicting those that are in the narcotics trade. And we are, where there is an evidential link between narcotics producers and the Taliban, then we're putting narcotics producers on the targeting list. Where their narcotics and the revenue of narcotics is directly feeding the Taliban, they become legitimate targets. So there's an issue there in terms of targeting and decapitation, which is also having an effect. But the biggest effect of all is the Food Zone program, which is a very big US and British funded program to get seed and fertilizer out to farmers to give them alternatives to grow other than poppy. And that's linked to some microfinance initiatives which allow them to get out of the debt cycle that many of them are in with the Taliban. That has been enormously successful. Upwards of 30,000 farmers have taken up on it. It's a really good demonstration of Afghan governance as well as having a counter-narcotics strand to it, and has led to, I think, that sort of reduction over the years. Now, long way to go. I don't buy the poverty angle. I don't buy the fact that these farmers have no alternative but to grow poppy, and you, having been there, well, I hope support me on that in terms of the cash crop potential in that area. But I think it'll be a problem with us for a while, but we're making some progress. Sorry, I banged on there.
Okay, General, thank you very much. I know we could grill you for much longer, but thank you very much.
No, thank you very much indeed.